Hey guys, thanks for joining in. We should be starting our webinar soon. We're waiting for a few more people to join in, so we should probably be starting in a minute. Thanks. All right, so let's get started. So welcome to our webinar on cloud security and the top 5 tools that we will be talking about for cloud security assessments. I think we have a diverse set of people today joining in from all over the world. So, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you might be. Today's webinar is going to be presented by my colleague, Sudarshan Narayanan. Just to set the context a bit, so I think all of us can, agree that, cloud has become quite an intrinsic component today when it comes to, product development and application development. And, increasingly what we have been seeing at we45 is that many of the, assessments that we do as part of our day-to-day and many of the clients who we talk to, increasingly we are seeing that many of their applications are either cloud native or have a large part of their application deployed on the cloud. And as a follow through from that, we're seeing that a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the assessments that we do have a large cloud component as part of this assessment. So what we wanted to do today as part of this webinar was to, essentially share, the ways that, the things that one needs to look at when you're conducting cloud security assessment. And my colleague Sudarshan would be taking you through a set of tools that are quite useful when it comes to, assessing cloud environments that, developers would be working on. And as how you could, go forward and subsequently automate this and tomorrow integrate this within your SDLC. So, without further ado, I'll, pass it over to my colleague Sudarshan. Take it away.
Thanks for the introduction, Bharat. Hello, everyone. Good morning. And if you're from other parts of the world, good afternoon or good evening. It gives me great pleasure to conduct this session on cloud security and how and what are the kind of tools that you can use as part of your cloud security assessments. Just to go over today's agenda, like Bharat said, we are going to talk about what are the current trends and hot topics when it comes to cloud security assessments and what is we45's modus operandi when it comes to performing cloud security assessments. We will also be going into the tools themselves, which are lined up over here. Where we have a bunch of tools. We will be talking about each of these tools, what they bring to the table, what are the kind of challenges that you would face while dealing with these tools. And then finally, we'll also be briefly looking into the automation capabilities, both from an open source tooling perspective and also a little bit from the cloud service providers perspective as well, in trying to figure out how they would be scaling application security for cloud native solutions, right? So without any further ado, let's kind of get into the zone. So before I get started on the tool spotlight, let me just take a moment to set the context with respect to understanding what cloud security is in today's contemporary scenario, right? So if you see, Gartner has this study that is done called the Hype Cycle for Cloud Security 2020. And if you see across the 5 different planes or the 5 different phases in which they talk about the trends that move and kind of define the industry, you see on the very right, you have the cloud security assessments and cloud security testing tools and services, which is kind of stabilized from a standpoint of industry-wide acceptance. And these are basically processes and technologies that help in securing cloud services from both internal as well as external threats. And what I mean by this is that we use certain tools that are inherently provided by the cloud service providers themselves, and on top of it we try to understand what are the kind of inherent threats that could plague applications, and look at trying to mitigating them and remediating them as much as possible. And that kind of brings me to the next point. As you see, there is a lot of services that are coming up which are very niche and also in the early stages of innovation. So if you see stuff like cloud work protection platforms, these are all mostly software defined services that would come on the cloud service provider themselves, right? So what this goes to show is that cloud native applications are more and more infrastructure as code or software defined, as opposed to traditional data centers where you would have to physically take care of bringing boxes online, installing operating systems, patching them, cabling them and all and whatnot. And as opposed to that, we are moving towards a more software defined approach towards cloud application development, and therefore the security part of it is also something that you'll have to look at purely from a misconfigurations perspective. So the reason is that majority of the vulnerabilities that are reported on the cloud are kind of centered around the misconfiguration bit. So if you see what has traditionally driven application security was that you have a target and you try to find what vulnerabilities would be the best way to kind of breach or cause some sort of damage for a particular target. But in the contemporary sense, if you see, we are looking at generic vulnerabilities that would be plaguing companies or products, and then the attackers try to choose which of these vulnerabilities can be launched upon set targets, right? So with this in mind, let us kind of look into what are the ways in which you can understand cloud security better, and what better way it is to do so than by understanding what shared responsibility model is, right? So this is a concept that is quite in the offering when it comes to cloud services. And basically what it means is that security is a shared responsibility when it comes to using cloud service providers, right? So there are certain things that the cloud service provider would be taking care of from their end. So as indicated in the lower half of the infographic, you see that cloud service providers like Amazon would take care of making sure that the hardware and the infrastructure is taken care of across various regions, across different availability zones, and make sure that they have various types of compute and storage available for the users to leverage upon, right? But what is something that the customers should have to take care is the whole concept of applying the patches, configuring their operating systems, configuring networks and firewalls. All of this would kind of become the responsibility of the consumer or the customer, right? So if one were to kind of take a crude analogy, so let's say if you are going to a shopping complex and you want to take your car and you park it there, so the responsibility of maintaining the parking lot would be that of the building, right? But after that, making sure that your car is locked will be upon your own responsibility. So kind of trying to draw the same analogy, you will have to look at cloud security also from the perspective of shared responsibility model. And at least this is what Amazon talks about. Now, if we also look at what Google has to offer, they also have a similar story to tell, where they say that Google would probably be managing for the infrastructure as service for, let's say, compute engines or cloud storages. They would be taking care of the networking, the storage and encryption, and the hardware and how they configure the kernel, and all of that would be something that Google would take at their end. But after which, the services that you use on top of Google when it comes to guest operating system or creating access authentications or any other network operations or other operations that you might have to handle would be entirely dependent on the end user themselves, right? So with this in mind, when we look at assessments for clients or in general consulting engagements, we45 goes with this approach. And basically, these could be the 5 different buckets in which we look at cloud service providers. So any and all cloud service providers and any and all clients who use various types of cloud service providers would essentially be bucketing their security under these 5 categories. So you have logging and monitoring. So basically, it's a question of saying that whether your cloud infrastructure has the necessary kind of mechanisms to capture any potential threats that might be happening, and when they are happening, when you know that you are under attack, are you being notified properly? Do you have the kind of log trails in place for you to be able to look at it and then take the required remediation or action for you to be able to solve that particular problem? Nextly, we look at identity and access management. So basically, we try to look at what are the various kind of users that you would have within your application and within your cloud infrastructure, and how well have they been configured. And one thumb rule when it comes to designing identity and access management policies would be to make sure that you follow the least privilege principle, wherein you give a particular user only access to that which they are supposed to use and nothing beyond, right? So even inadvertently somebody does not get privileges to use some resources, like say spinning up instances or scaling instances, so that if those users are compromised, an attacker might leverage that to try and expand upon the resources and cause a great deal of damage, or they could potentially exfiltrate information, therefore again resulting in punitive damages and so on and so forth, right? So moving on, we have another tenant on which we look at cloud security, which would be under secrets management, wherein excuse me, we try to understand how well the client is using the cloud service provider's infrastructure to manage both sensitive information as well as secrets. So is the secret with, so usually secret is the one you use to protect your sensitive information, and if your secret is something that is very very much exposed, then you could end up compromising the sensitive information that you are trying to protect. So are you managing your secrets properly? Are you using stuff like key management solutions, or are you using something like HashiCorp Vault that allows you to store secrets in a more secure manner, right? So that is something that we would try to essentially look for as part of our cloud security assessments. And then uh, one other integral component when it comes to application delivery is storage. And this storage could be one where you are using critical data to store as part of the customer's data set, or as part of the data set that you would use to kind of deploy or use your application in order to render some sort of business functionality. So how well are you storing that data within your cloud service provider? What kind of storage policies do you put in place? Whether do you have proper type of encryption in place? Do you have access controls policies set in place? All of that is also something that we would like to ideally check for. And finally, networking, wherein you try to understand what are the various components that you have used within your cloud service provider in order to deploy your application, whether those networking controls are in place from a security standpoint, ensuring that you have proper security groups, or if you have stuff like VPC flow logs to ensure that all traffic that is getting sent over your network is getting captured properly, and so on and so forth, right? These are basically the 5 tenets in which we try to conduct security assessments for our clients who use various types of service providers, whether it is Amazon or Google or Oracle Cloud or what have you, right? With that being said, let's kind of get into the whole tool spotlight, where we will start looking into each of the tools that we would be talking about today. So first we will start with Scout Suite. Scout Suite is a very popular open source tool that has been developed by the NCC group. Some of the salient features of this tool is that it's quite easy to set up, and it has a fairly good community support, and it is well documented as well. One of the best things about Scout Suite is that it supports a fairly large number of at least top cloud service providers in the market today. It has support for AWS, it has support for Google Cloud, it has support for Azure, and I believe it also has support for Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So with this tool, you would be able to conduct scans or security assessments for these various types of cloud security providers. And it also offers customizable rules for running scans. So it comes with a default set of rules, but if you want to customize those rules, you can do so because they support a JSON format. You can go ahead and add the kind of checks that you would want to have as part of your applications cloud as part of your cloud security providers requirements, or maybe as part of your compliance requirements if you have any. And all of this can be done using the Scout Suite tool. And finally, one great thing is that it also integrates with AWS Security Hub. Now, AWS Security Hub is a service offered by Amazon wherein it aggregates data from various types of services that are offered within the Amazon ecosystem. And what it basically does is collates information across these various other data sources, like say Macy or Detective or Inspector or Guard Duty or CloudTrail and CloudWatch. It basically collates all of this information and gives you one single cohesive dashboard wherein you can look at what are the kind of problems that you face within your cloud infrastructure and how you would want to go about it. Now, if you're using something like Scout and you trigger those scans and push those results to AWS Security Hub, you'll have one single place where you can look at all your security related problems, right? So these are some of the good things about Scout. And coming to some of the issues or challenges that we've faced with Scout is that it does have a lot of false positives. And for the lack of a better term, it does not have context in terms of what would be considered as a vulnerability that might be really causing problems for you, in the sense that whether you might be actually vulnerable to an attack. When I say this, what I essentially mean is that these are not necessarily exploits. So these are all indications of potential misconfigurations. Now, these could be mitigated by some of the default least privilege principle design that Amazon uses by itself, but then some of them could also be true. And that is something that you will have to look at and scrutinize the result set in order to ensure that you are not missing out on something, right? So that's one. The other one is that it has very limited exploitation capabilities. And what I mean by this is that it's a great reconnaissance tool, in the sense that you can glean a lot of information about the service provider based on the details that you provide, but it will not help you to essentially exploit or launch some manual or semi-automated attacks on your cloud service provider directly, right? That is something that we see as a potential limitation. And then finally, like all of, or at least like many of these tools, Scout Suite needs a proper credential or access, so to speak, for you to be able to use it, in the sense that you will need an access key and a secret key to be configured. Now, usually what we do is that when we engage with clients, we would request for a security audit role or a user assigned with a security audit role, so that that user will be able to conduct scans non-invasively inside your cloud infrastructure. And then we would be able to understand what are the various kind of users within your system or your cloud service provider, and then can we laterally move or pivot from one user's credentials to another. And if that is possible, then we try to then just chain and move up the value chain in the cloud service provider, and then try to launch attacks. Now, let me quickly show you what the Scout tool looks like. And yeah, so let me just bring up the CI. So if you see, so as you can see, it has a CLI that shows you all the cloud service providers that it is supporting. So let's say I want to look at AWS, what it has to offer. So you see, it offers you a host of options. You can, try to configure your scan in a very broad sense, in the sense that you can give the access key and secret key, and then try to run everything under the sun, or you can basically look for very specific checks that you would want to run. Suppose you are interested in only running a particular list of services, you can do that as well. And you can use pre-configured AWS profiles, or you can also provide the access keys directly. You can also provide session tokens if you are using something like a SAML authentication, where after every 8 hours the token gets refreshed. So if you want to pass that in that sense, you can do that as well. You can also run it region specific, because sometimes if you are to run the scan across the board, it might take some time. So if you are somebody who's using all your AWS resources under one single region and don't have a lot of ground to cover, you can do that as well. And this is kind of what it looks like. And the great thing about Scout is that it offers a nice HTML report, which let me just pull it up real quick. Sweet. Right. Yeah. So you see, you have a nice HTML report that's quite interactive, and you can drill down each of these categories to figure out what exactly is going on in your cloud service provider. So let's say if you want to look at the security posture and you want to understand how you are doing on the IAM uh, of your cloud service provider, you can have a look at it, and it says, see, there are some things that we'll have to look out for. Some of the users don't have key rotation in place, so that's something that you'll have to probably look at. So make sure that you have a key rotation policy that is in place, and every 90 days you have keys rotated, so that even in the case of compromise within a certain period of time, you would be able to have keys rotated, so that you don't compromise your identity access at any point in time. Similarly, if you want to say you want to look at compute, and if you want to look at your EC2 instances, you can look at all the checks that goes within the EC2 instances, and when you click on it, you will be shown what exactly are the kind of volumes you have in place and what kind of encryption you put in place. Those kind of details you will be able to glean from the report itself. That's one of the most silent features of the Scout Suite tool. That being said, now let's then move into Prowler, just the next tool. Now this tool is again a great reconnaissance tool. It's also fairly easy to set up, and the unique thing about this tool is that it offers you security checks with, for a wide range of compliance standards, whether you want to do it as part of the CIS benchmark that is out for AWS, or if you would want to do it along the lines of PCI DSS or HIPAA checks, or any of the custom checks that the Prowler team itself has put in place, which is categorized as extra, because they are all non-marked or non-CIS based checks. You can do them individually and try to figure out what exactly is the kind of result you are getting from Prowler and how you would want to go about it. This also offers customizable rules, in the sense that if you want to have certain specific checks inside your cloud service provider, you will be able to do that, because it integrates with the APIs. especially with Amazon. But one of the biggest challenges is that it is only AWS centric and it does not support other cloud service providers. And just like Scout, you also need keys to drive, in the sense that you will need access keys and secret keys, without which you will not be able to get much from this particular tool. And from an automation perspective, again, you will be able to run it as part of your pipeline if you choose to run it so. But again, beyond that, there is very limited possibility for you to engage in any sort of automation. So let me just quickly pull up the Prowler tool and show you how it looks like. So I have started a scan just before the demo, just to make sure that we have some data to show. So if you see, the best thing about Prowler is that it shows all these details as pass and fail. So you have a check. So for example, no security groups allow ingress or egress from certain types of ports for the Cassandra service. And this is not a part of the CAS benchmark, but nevertheless, you will be able to get it. In this particular case, they have passed because there is nothing there to be found, and therefore it is passing. But let's say if you have to look at some of the older results, you will be able to find some issues. Right. Okay. Let's look at some of the IAM related issues. So if you see ensure credentials are unused for 30 days, you'd be able to see that some of the users have not logged in, or some of them have not changed passwords, or if some of them have very weak passwords as part of their console login, that is also something that will get flagged over here. This will help in putting in place strong password policies to ensure that those who access both the programmatic access or the API access as well as the console access have strong passwords, and they do not get caught in any sort of weak password game as part of their cloud service, right? So this is with respect to Prowler. Now let's move back to Paku. Paku, now this tool is an exploitation framework. It has been exclusively designed for AWS, and it's a very, very handy tool when it comes to offensive security testing. One of the great things about Paku is that it has a lot of modules, and these modules allow you to do some specific tasks against your cloud service provider. So let's say if you are using a bunch of services, cloud native services like say Lambda and EC2 and S3, and if you want to do some specific enumeration with regards to these targets, you will be able to do it using the Paku framework. And then based on the data that you get from these modules, you will then be able to know what exactly you can go and do in terms of exploitation. And another great thing about Paku is that it holds multiple sessions for different engagements. So if you have a bunch of engagements that you would like to, conduct, and if you want to store different kind of credentials like different access keys and secret keys, it does this as well. And it is a fairly well supported tool from the community. It's very well documented. There's a bunch of videos and tutorials for you to figure out how to use these tools in a very effective manner. Coming to the cons, as I mentioned, this is very, very AWS centric, and I don't think it supports other cloud service providers at the moment, but I'm sure that the development team would be looking into expanding the coverage for other service providers as well. But this is definitely a tool. If you are an AWS shop, I would highly recommend using Paku, especially as part of your red team engagements, to ensure that they are, using these tools to try and see if they can launch any sort of attacks on your application. So let me just quickly jump back into the Paku tool. So the tool is basically fairly well documented. So it has a lot of options. So if you see, you can list whatever data you have, all that you've already accumulated for this particular service provider. You can have a look at what are the kind of data you have already enumerated, what kind of information that you have already gathered from the access key, secret key you have configured. And let me list some of the modules that will help you understand these tools power much better. So if you see from initial uh, reconnaissance, you can try to find how many S3 buckets are there. You can try to enumerate IAM users. You can try to enumerate what kind of roles you have and what kind of permissions that they might be coming with. And you can also try to understand what kind of reports that you already have. So for example, if you are using inspector as part of your cloud service provider, and if you already have some reports, you can try to understand what kind of vulnerabilities you already have. And as a security auditor, if you try to find out that one of the EC2 servers is running an old version of, let's say, SSL TLS, that could be potentially something that you can use for, let's say, doing something like a poodle attack or an SSL downgrade attack that could help you to do it. That the off chance that the chance of actually pulling out this exploit must be, in this particular case, could be very remote. But the idea here is to say that if you have a particular type of attack that you would like to launch on your application, you can use these modules to try and understand what kind of services or what kind of data you can first gather, and then further look at how you can go about enumerating and then further exploiting your application, right? Okay, next up we have a tool called WeirdAl. Now this is again a tool that is very specific to reconnaissance and information gathering. And one of the greatest things about these tools is that it gives a very detailed list of uh, permissions that has been assigned with your particular access key and secret key. And if you want to then use that to understand what kind of users are there and what kind of permissions they have, this is a great tool for you to do that. There are a lot of modules that you can use to fetch this information across the board for all the services that you use. And again, the cons are that this is a very uh, this tool has some limitations when it comes to automation. So let me quickly show you the tool. Okay, so if you see, these are the various types of modules that you have within the tool that allows you to understand what kind of data you would have in your cloud service provider. So right now I have configured this particular tool as a security auditor where I have security audit privileges. And if I want to try and find out what kind of EC2 instances I have running on this particular box, I can do that. Or I can do an all-out reconnaissance where I can say, all, and I'll say my target is security audit demo. I think, yeah. So you see it's printing out all the various users you have, who has console access, what kind of permissions that they have for some of the services. So for example, access analyzer service, you have list analyzers method is allowed. And since AWS is fairly API driven, now this helps you to understand which services and what APIs you have permissions to access. So from the CLI, if you have access key and secret key and you try to run this tool, you will be able to figure out what permissions you have. And then from there, pivoting into other zones or other areas within the cloud service provider would be much more easier for you, right? Cool. And then finally we have Nimbo-status. Now this is again a cloud specific tool that has a lot of exploit focus. though it has, though it is modular and extensible, I believe the number of modules that it has is quite limited, and and still it can be used for getting a lot of information on a target instance. Again, the cons is that you need access keys and secret keys to run this particular tool. And in terms of exploitation, like I said, it is not as powerful as a tool like Paku, but you can still try to do attacks like, backend services exploitation. Like for example, if you have some specific components, like for example Celery or Django running on your backend, you can try to launch some sort of SSRF style attacks on your instances and try to glean some information. I'll just quickly show a small demo. So I have already a vulnerable application running on particular IP. Believe this. Yeah. So if you see, there's this web application that I have spun up, and it contains file directory structure. And if I go inside and if I figure out, I notice that there is a file that has an AWS API key and a secret key in place. Now, what I will try to do is to try and see if I can take this information and set it as part of my I'm afraid it's not getting set. 1 second. Let me just quickly stop sharing my screen. Okay, yeah, just a second. All right. So basically, I have cleaned this particular access key and secret key that has been hard coded in this target. Right now, I've set this new uh, uh, this credentials from this new user called EC2 King, and now I will try to use Nimbo-status to dump this particular permissions. Okay, set up the tool. Oh, I have the right key. So you see here, it shows you what actions you are authorized to perform using this particular user's credentials, and then based on that we can try to perform some attacks. So let's say, let's try to look at what EC2 instances are already running. There is already one instance that is running, which has been the application that we just saw, the one that is running on this. Now our idea is to try and bring up another instance which using the same user's ID, we access key and secret key ID, we will try to basically bring up another rogue instance and insert it with a tag called hacked, so that we know for a fact that we've been able to use another person's or access key and secret key and bring up instances that we were not originally privileged to do so. So now if you see, if I run scribe instances, you should be able to see, if I search for act, you will be able to see that I have brought up new instances. And if I go to the EC2 dashboard, I should be running 2 instances and not one. One of them should be called tags as hacked, right? So I am originally not supposed to run this, but since I have gathered the access key and secret key from this, using the Nimbo-status tool, I was able to exfiltrate that information, and then using the AWS CLI, I was able to basically bring up another instance with that particular person's access key and secret key. So these are some of the ways in which cloud security assessment can be done using these tools, and then subsequently use them for launching attacks on your application. Now, coming to the whole automation bit, I believe there are many things that you can do. However, as part of this particular presentation, 2 things that we would like to probably talk upon is the use of AWS code pipeline for triggering scans. And this is something that we can try to talk about as part of our code pipeline demo that we have. So basically the idea here is to make sure that as you have an application in your repository, you can make sure that you are telling the build spec YAML to make sure that you are running whatever tools, security tools that you would like to run. Say, for example, if you are having a Python based application, you can try to mention that the SAST and SCA tools should be run as part of the build pipeline. And when you are configuring it with AWS code pipeline, you will be able to do so and view the results that are getting pushed into your S3 bucket. So if you see, if I go to say code pipeline, I already have triggered a particular pipeline for a Python application called, it's a Flask app. Now I have pushed the results into the S3 bucket already. And as part of this build, I would have 2 results that are sitting inside my S3 bucket, which is a SAST result and an SCA result. And you can do this for every build as part of your, let's say, weekly build, or as part of your nightly build, however you would want to do it. You can go about including these build specs as part of your code pipeline, and those results could be then accumulated and used as part of an application vulnerability correlation engine or something to that effect, where you will be able to analyze these results as and when they as and when the application is built, and you will be able to triage these results, right? So this is one particular option that we can look at from a cloud security automation perspective. The other one being trying to use the native cloud security tools that are offered from within the service provider. So for in the case of AWS, you have something called as Macy that allows you to guard and protect sensitive data, and tries to use a lot of machine learning and deep learning to try and understand what kind of patterns it sees when it comes to sensitive data that is flowing within your system, and how you would want to get uh, alerts or emails, depending on if there is any sort of breach that has happened. If some user or some entity has tried to access a sensitive data that is they are not supposed to see, you can get automated messages. And similarly, you can also use guard duty as a part of your continuous security monitoring to ensure that anytime you try to get hacked or any sort of event happens, you will be notified, or those kind of requests can be monitored in real time, and accordingly alerts can be triggered. And finally, you can also use something like inspector, where you will be running scans against your AWS EC2 images to make sure that they are running secure versions of guest OSs, or any sort of patches that might be missed, that might contain some sort of potential security vulnerability. And that these are all ways in which you can scale cloud security in a very automated fashion, and be able to scale as you grow in the number of assets that you use. And all of this in conjunction with something like security hub is something that would be very, very effective as a entire strategy that you would adopt for your cloud security. That kind of brings me to the end of my presentation. So I'd be more than happy to take some questions at this point in time.
Thanks, Sudarshan. So we have opened the floor for questions now. If there's any, people can type into the chat or into the QA, and we're taking questions at this time. So in the meantime, as people are, I think there's a question. Just a minute. Right. So the question is, can we share some good targets that are exploitable and vulnerable setup, like a cloud goat?
Yeah, actually, Cloud Goat is actually a great place to start. Just like Juice Shop, you can try to understand the various types of attacks that you would be able to launch. So something like IAM privilege escalation, or S3 bucket misconfiguration is one good place. You can also look at floss.cloud, which is also a great place to start to learn cloud security. The link is fairly straightforward. So you can try to, you'll have some flag kind of exercises. You should be able to clear them as and when you clear, the kind of complexity of each exercise would increase. So that's also a great place to start.
Right. Thanks, Sudarshan. All right. While people are typing in our questions, I will just take this opportunity to mention that we do webinars such as this, the last Thursday of every month. So do stay tuned to our social channels on LinkedIn and Twitter. We regularly update upcoming events such as webinars and trainings that we do. And as I think was mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this recording of this webinar would be posted on our YouTube channel. So do check that out, and subscribe to our YouTube channels, and also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to stay up to date on developments that we put out there. The other thing that I also wanted to mention was with respect to upcoming training programs. So we are doing one quite soon in the second week of November. This is specifically to our Kubernetes masterclass. And I think as part of we're also doing a promotional offer for all the for all the people who attended this webinar. We are giving a discount coupon as well. So the link is in the chat. Do check it out. The Eventbrite page, and the course curriculum is also outlined. So if you're interested, do sign up. The training is from the 10th to the 13th of November, and the sessions are essentially 4 hours each day. This would be a virtual instructor-led session. We're also doing a program in Black Hat EU in December, and the link for that is also available. So do check that out. This is our DevSecOps Masterclass, and I believe this is one of our courses which has been very well received, and we have done this across multiple conferences across the years, with very good reviews. So you can definitely check that out in Black Hat EU if you're interested. So I think that's all that we had for today. As I said, the recording would be available in our YouTube channel soon, and do subscribe to our social channels to stay up to date. Thank you. It was a pleasure having you today for this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you soon.